Now I'm going to talk about permanent residency. Hong Kong's good because effectively the first 7 years of your time here you are a temporary resident, and that means that the immigration department want to have a say in everything that you do during those first 7 years. And it's perfectly possible during those 7 years to change immigration statuses to reflect what's going on in your life during that time. So you could come as a visitor, secure a job offer, get an employment visa, work for an employer for 1.5 years, change employers, work for a new employer for 1.5 years, gather together resources, determine you want to establish or join in a business, get a business investment visa, and then that takes you through to 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, you can then make an application to the immigration department to adjust your status from temporary residency to permanent residency. And the test for approval is you need to have been continuously and ordinarily resident in Hong Kong for at least 7 years. And any absences from Hong Kong in that time need to have been of a merely temporary nature, as evidenced by what you leave behind to return back to at the end of each temporary stay abroad. And you also need to have become clearly settled in Hong Kong throughout all of that time, and not least be settled in Hong Kong at the time that you make your application for permanent residency. And there needs to be no outstanding taxation liabilities, and there need be no security objection to the immigration department granting you permanent residency. You need to have back-to-back residence visas throughout in Hong Kong throughout all of that time, unless there was a short period of time between visa statuses where you didn't have or you couldn't have a valid residence visa endorsed in your passport because of one reason or another, possibly because you were changing jobs just about the time that your one period of stay was expiring and the immigration department needed some more time to finalise your new application, so you fell into something called what I call the twilight zone. Or it may have been that there was issues with your passports and the way that the timing of your passports were issued and the timing of your visas meant that there was perhaps a month or two where a week or two where there was a state of administrative flux going on as to your ability to have a manifested residence visa. And it is also possible to spend, maybe up to about 3 or 4 months on visitor status without a formal residence visa, where you've been between residence visas, and effectively during that time you argue to the immigration department that your settlement has been continued even though you had merely a visitor visa, and the visitor visa was the only visa that was available to you while you went through the process of finalising the circumstances that would allow you to make a formal application, say for an investment visa, or you were looking earnestly for a job and the interview process was just taking a few weeks longer than you might otherwise have hoped it would take. And therefore, in those circumstances, that short period of time as a visitor doesn't break your continuity of residence. And so throughout those 7 years, if you've got those circumstances in play, you make an application to the immigration department ensuring that you've got a residence visa on the day that you apply, and that you will have a residence visa on the day that they approve your application. And if you can show continuous ordinary residence through having documents such as your tenancy agreements, or if you've owned property here throughout all of that time, and that you've been making a consistent series of tax filings to the immigration department, and indeed if you've spent a significant time away from Hong Kong, you can clearly show to the immigration department that you were holding a residence visa but you had a good reason for being away, and that it was your intent at the time that you departed, even though you were away for a long time, to depart on a merely temporary basis, as I say, as evidenced by what you've left behind to return back to. So you can have time away from Hong Kong and it's not going to break your continuity of ordinary residence, as long as you've got in place all the constructs of a normal, ordinary settled life in Hong Kong that you can return back to at the end of any such time away. And if you can pass that approvability test, then the immigration department will convert your temporary residence into permanent residence, and they will give you a permanent identity card. And the right of abode is reflected in the permanent identity card. And the right of abode is effectively de facto citizenship, albeit without a passport. You can get the right of abode if you're a long-stay foreign national resident that has secured PR in that fashion, but you can't get a HKCR passport because HKCR passport is ultimately tied to Chinese citizenship. So if you want to get a HKCR passport and you are a permanent resident of Hong Kong, you effectively have to relinquish your existing nationality. You have to show to the authorities that you are connected to China in the requisite sort of way, which usually means property ownership, marriage to a Chinese national, the ability to speak Chinese, some other objective opportunity to persuade the Immigration Department that you are, in a sense, entitled to Chinese citizenship because of your connections to China. And if you do pass that test, then, as I say, you relinquish your existing nationality in the process and you can qualify for a HKCR passport, and then you become a full citizen of China, if you will. But for all practical purposes, the right of abode that you get as a long-stay foreign national is the same as the right of abode as you get as if you're a Chinese national, except for one thing, that as a foreign national, you have to maintain your ties to Hong Kong to be able to maintain the right of abode. And the way that you show your continuing ties to Hong Kong to maintain the right of abode is to be physically present in Hong Kong on at least one occasion in any 3-year given period. So if you can satisfy that test, the right of abode will not be lost. If you lose the right of abode, you will get downgraded to the right to land, which is one notch lower than the right of abode and carries less privileges, in fact rights, to be exact about it. But for all practical purposes, even if you do get downgraded to the right to land because you leave Hong Kong for more than 3 years at a stretch, the right to land allows you literally that, the right to land, and not have any conditions of stay imposed upon you by an immigration officer. So you can immediately fall back into Hong Kong society as though you've never left. So there isn't a great practical consequence of having been downgraded from the right of abode to the right to land. But actually, I mean, if all it takes is to jump on an aeroplane and come back and make one landing, pass through immigration and then come back, then, you know, why would you allow your right of abode to be degraded in that fashion? So that's permanent residency. And then I think the final thing I'm going to talk about is what happens if you get denied? What can you do next?